happy to be joined by the Group CEO of Goldfields, Mike Fraser, who's just released the 2025 end-of-year results to talk to us about how he sees those results and the outlook for 2026. Mike, thanks for joining us here in Accra. Good morning.
Good morning, Bernard. Good to be with you today.
How would you describe the 2025 results?
Look, I think for us, we believe it was a very solid contribution from our teams across the globe. I think first and foremost, I'd like to say what was most pleasing is that we were able to keep people safe and everyone could go home safe and well at the end of every day. And that's something that really keeps us focused every single day. But apart from that, I think we were really pleased with the operational delivery from our teams across the globe. We were able to deliver an increase of 18% in our production year on year compared to 2024. That was delivered by strong contributions from across the globe. The impact of our ramp-up of our assets, Salares Norte and Chile, certainly assisted in diluting the impact of inflationary costs that we've been seeing across the globe. And therefore, our costs were only up 3% at a portfolio level across the business. I think the other thing that was pleasing is obviously the increase in capital returns to shareholders.
How much did Ghana contribute to this good performance?
Yeah, so Ghana is an important part of our portfolio. The Taqua asset in particular is a cornerstone asset in our portfolio, and we were able to deliver nearly 475,000 ounces of gold produced during the year. That was slightly lower than the prior year, so we saw gold production down compared to 2024, but that was largely because we were prioritizing a significant amount of waste capital development in the mine, and so whilst our total tons moved were slightly lower year on year, we had a significantly lower amount of ore mined. That meant that we used lower grade stockpiles to feed through the mill, and that delivered the lower production ounces. But having said that, it was again a continued strong contribution from the team. What was also important for the year is that we delivered a new life of mine plan, which supports our lease extension for our Taqua asset. And that was a significant amount of work done by our teams on site to deliver a really good outlook for Taqua going forward.
So in terms of the life of mine plan, should I understand that to mean Taqua has a longer life ahead of it in terms of its production capacity? Can you elaborate a bit on how you see Taqua behaving in the next few years?
Yes, absolutely. And so what we did with Taqua is we actually lifted our reserves by around 3.1 million ounces with the announcement that we put out in November following the revised life of mine plan. This was important is that it lifted our production life from around 8 years to over 20 years of life. And that was important because what we wanted to demonstrate with our application on the lease renewal is that with the right horizon on this asset and with the right amount of reinvestment, we were able to create a much longer horizon for the asset. And that in turn creates a lot of other opportunities to continue to reinvest, to potentially then lift production even further for this asset. So that was a really important piece of work that we were busy with last year.
And in terms of optimism from the government of Ghana's side, whether your application for extension of lease will be successful, how optimistic are you?
Look, I believe very positively that we are working in a very collaborative way with the government around this lease. I think it's quite clear and uncontested that Goldfields has made a very positive contribution to the economy as well as to society in Ghana over many decades. And certainly we are pleased with our position there because it aligns with our purpose of making a positive impact in the societies in which we operate. So we absolutely believe that we can continue to make a contribution and a positive contribution in Ghana for decades to come. And it's quite clear that in Ghana at the moment there is an expectation of a constructive dialogue about how we can increase participation and increase the contribution that the sector provides to people of Ghana. And we feel confident that our track record speaks about our intentions and what we will try and do going forward. So I am positive. I know that we're one of the first large renewals that is coming to government for discussion. And I think as we're getting clarity about mining policy, a lot of that will play into this lease renewal process. But with that, we're having positive dialogues, and I'm positive that we will find the right pathway together for the benefit of the people of Ghana.
You usually assess a year on safety, operational, and finance. And on all three, you seem very happy. How much of your financial performance was based on the behavior of the gold price over the last quarter, at least, of the previous year?
Yeah, so look, if you look at it across the group, I would say, probably two kind of relevant statistics. So the gold price was up around 60% year on year on average. But what we did see is that our cash flows were up nearly 5 times year on year. So this is the benefit that gold companies and gold producers actually provide for investors, is that leveraged exposure to the gold price. You can go and buy gold and get a certain return, and we still believe that gold is going to be an important investment allocation opportunity. But gold companies that deliver safe, reliable, and predictable outcomes certainly will outperform underlying gold just because of that inherent leverage that you have.
But does the higher price of gold in the past few months portend anything for next year? Are you hoping to do more exploration and ramp up production because of the way the price is behaving?
Yeah, and what we did, Bernard, last year is we actually went to the market in November preemptively and put a 5-year outlook in place for our business. And we looked at every single one of our operations and said, what is the opportunity, given these high gold prices, to really set these assets up for the long term? And what is important in our attitude is that we recognize that actually reinvesting in existing assets is equally as important as going and finding out the assets for the next generation. And that's why, if you bring it close to home in Ghana, that opportunity to re-look at Taqua and find ways to extend life by increasing investment and unconstraining the asset is important for us, and that's what we were able to deliver. So that was the mindset that we brought. We were able to do that across a number of operations in our portfolio, and then in addition we'll continue to do additional exploration to see where those next resources are coming from.
But generally, are you expecting the price of gold to keep going up or behaving the way it is, looking at geopolitical issues, uncertainties around the independence of the US Fed, and the fact that a lot more central banks are buying gold? What's your own price outlook, and how does that feed into other plans?
Look, that's a really good question, and it's really important not to get caught up in the hype of where gold prices are at. So whilst personally and as a company we do believe that gold prices will remain at elevated levels for longer, it's equally important that we apply moderation in how we think about the outlook. So what we typically use is consensus prices, and if you look at consensus prices today in the long term, this is around $3,300. So we do believe that gold isn't always going to be at these levels, and therefore it's important that when we make investment decisions, and equally the same conversation goes to governments, when you're making structural reforms like we're talking about at the moment, think about the business in the long term and the long-term sustainability of the industry. And that's what we do when we think about investments in our business. So everything needs to be able to create a return and be sustainable at consensus long-term prices, not just being swayed by the price of the day.
Let's come to some Ghana-specific questions, if you may, briefly. Of course, you lost that mine, and we know the history of that. I don't want to go into all the details. But there appears to be two key issues in Ghana where there's a bigger appetite for local or government ownership or participation, and there's also expectation of higher royalties, leading to the so-called sliding scale royalty proposal. How do you interpret those two from where you sit?
No, and look, I think this is the inherent tension that you see with resources all over the world. And I think Ghana is absolutely going through the right conversation to say, how do we make sure there's an appropriate contribution of the sector to the people of Ghana, both through the fiscus as well as participation in the sector by local Ghanaians. So I think it's an absolutely appropriate conversation. But I think what we've got to do is look at where does success come. And success comes in the way that we actually create a healthy sector that provides a space for all players to participate. We are quite clear that if you look at assets like Taqua, which is a significant asset, it's got the potential, down the road to be one of the most significant gold mines in Africa. That does require participation from multiple parties. And I think what we can bring as a global miner is a balance sheet that can enable the long-term sustainability and the delivery of the potential of the asset. Equally, what we can do is bring skills, capabilities, and knowledge working with our local teams to actually make the best of the assets. And then what we can also do is enable the development of significant local capability, which we've also done in the decades past through the way that we've built up contractors. We've created significant opportunities for local Ghanaian enterprises. So a healthy ecosystem is one where we can actually work together, where we actually create an opportunity to bring foreign investment into the country, where we actually utilize the capabilities of global mining companies to create a more healthy sector together. So I don't think it's a threat. It's a healthy conversation, but the right one is where we can actually have all of these players working together to create a healthy sector. And if you just look at the countries around the world that have been successful, it's the ones that have been able to find that balance.
So you spoke about the 5-year plan and also your life of mine for Taqua. Clearly, you didn't anticipate a different royalty regime in those plans. So the so-called sliding scale royalty regime, what are your thoughts on that? Do you have an alternative proposal? What conversations are you having with the government in order to not to compromise the Taqua work, but also to strike that fine balance you referred to?
Yeah, and I think, first and foremost, I'd be quite clear that the message that we delivered to the minister, as well as, directly and as well through the chamber, we're not different in the industry view, that we feel that this royalty change is quite aggressive, and particularly if you look at it in a competitive lens in what the rest of the world does. And that's on the base of a fairly market-related tax regime. So this certainly puts Ghana at the higher end of government receipts out of the sector. And I think, again, I come back to the point, my bigger concern is not what it does to the industry today, but what does it do in terms of future competitiveness of the industry. So that's kind of the general conversation that we've put forward. I mean, there's no doubt that the way that we've thought about Taqua's success going forward, and I must just put it out there, that the government of Ghana are a participant in Taqua. So they own 10% of Taqua today. And so our interests in some respects are aligned in how well we run the asset for the long term, not just for today. And when we think about the additional royalty, quite clearly it does change the relationship of the return. It means that the government increases their overall return out of this asset. But I think what we're also trying to do is to improve the competitiveness. So the things that we are doing on investing in the business to make it sustainable in the long term, by being able to improve the margins of this asset in the long term, that'll be largely offset by some of these royalty increases. But that just makes the need to improve Taqua for the long term even more compelling to make it sustainable.
Two more questions before we wrap up. And Mike, thank you so much for your time. for the first time, Ghana's split between large-scale mine gold and small-scale mine gold has tipped in favor of small-scale. So even though it's around 49.51, so now we're mining more gold from small-scale, some of which are legal, some of which may be illegal. What do you make of that? Is that are you worried about that? What's your comment?
No, look, I think this is a really, really important strategic question for Ghana, and it's one that I've also had open conversations with the ministry around, and it's one that we have to work together on very clearly. And I look at the sector between, there's three parties in the way that I categorize it, and I think you see it the same way. We have large-scale formal miners. We have small-scale, either in the formal sector or outside the formal sector, and then we have the large illegal miners. I think what we've got to do is work together collaboratively to try and improve the performance, both environmentally and financially, of that informal sector, the small-scale sector. And what we've been doing is having a conversation through the ministry about saying, how do we bring the whole large-scale industry together with the small scale, with the refiners, with the Gold Board, with the World Gold Council, to actually put an entire system of support behind the small-scale sector to improve the capability and the returns out of that sector. So I think there's space for all of us. But if we can work together to improve that small-scale sector, we hopefully then diminish the impact and the influence of the illegal sector. So that's certainly a strategy that we are committed to and would like to be part of the solution. And I think with the capabilities that we have and the resources we have, we can do that. And it's not just about giving land up for small-scale miners, but actually bring real technical capability to improve yields, to improve the financial outcomes.
And do you see a role for the newly created Gold Board in all of this?
Yes, I do. I think they do have a role. Again, I think what success is going to look like is where we all lean in. We all bring our unique contributions to make this a success. And it's not one lever that we have to pull.
Let's end with the foundation. The Goldfields Ghana Foundation, we are told, surpassed $109 million in cumulative community investment since its founding, cementing its position as the longest running and most capitalized mining foundation in Ghana. How proud of you are that, and what are your thoughts on its areas of emphasis? Infrastructure seems to still be its biggest share as compared to education and other things. What are your thoughts on the foundation's work and how that fits into the way communities see mining? Your closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. Look, I think for us, that is absolutely tied to our purpose. So the only way we make true impact is when our host communities feel a positive impact from our contribution. And so the Ghana Foundation does amazing work in improving the lived experience of people in our host communities. I know that the focus and the way that we engage through our foundation, we really work with our host communities to identify the priorities that are important to them for where our investments go. And you're quite right, a lot of the contribution has been in formal infrastructure and establishing infrastructure because that's been the requirements. But equally important, what's close to us is improving focus on things like education, health, things that are much more sustainable for individuals and not just the physical infrastructure around them. So certainly as we think about our contributions globally, health, education are certainly things that are high on our agenda.
Thank you, Mike, and congrats on a good end-of-year report for 2025.
Thank you, Bernard. Thanks for your time.
Wonderful. We've been speaking to Mike Fraser, who is the group CEO for Goldfields. They have major investments in Ghana, the Taqua mine being the biggest. Of course, they had the Daman mine. The lease was not renewed. And as we read at the end, a lot of work they do in communities. So thanks for watching this segment of the show. We'll be right back. First part, we took a look again at the unfortunate incident that led to the death of a 29-year-old man on the 7th of February, speaking to Dr. Nana Dazi Gansa and Mr. Ewa Amwa, who is a paramedic with the ambulance service. Later on, we spoke to the CEO of Goldfields, Mike Fraser, on their 2025 results. Thanks for watching tonight's edition of the show. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.